Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Resources Scrutiny for February. I need to just check that everybody that is online can hear okay. Can you hear online? Yeah, yes, Lee.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. The agenda pack with the papers is available via mod.gov or directly from the council website from the link which was sent out to members. When you are invited to speak, could you please state clearly who you are for the benefit of anybody who is listening to the meeting so that they can identify who is speaking, and please ensure that you use the microphones if you are in the room. The meeting will be audio recorded by the council. As agendas are now viewed electronically, could members and officers please refer to page numbers from the published agenda pack to assist everyone present in finding the appropriate information. We are not expecting a fire alarm today, but should this happen, please follow the Democratic Services officers and they will lead the way out. Can I remind members that there is a transformation workshop that will be held at 2:30 this afternoon in the Wyndham room. And for those officers and members involved, there's also an agenda setting meeting immediately after this committee meeting. So there is a fairly full day today. Could I just also say that it's not only full for us, but it's also full for the officers, that Mr. Heafy and Officer Nix have to leave us for another meeting at 12. And so I'm going to exercise my chairman's prerogative and reverse items 7 and 6, if that is permissible with you all, so that we can make sure that we've dealt with item 7 in good time before the officers have to leave us. Okay, thank you. So are there any apologies for absence, please?
Thank you, Chair. If I can just report that I know Councillor Mansell is unable to be present with us today, but I know Councillor Mansell is joining us online. And as many members will be aware, Councillor Osborne has a dispensation, so equally she will not be present today.
Thank you. So the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 28th of January have been circulated. May I take them as a true record, please? Yes, all in favour? Oh, Councillor Stanton.
If I could just raise on page 20, I'll ask this again when we come to the tracker on a later item, but the reference, you remember we had a debate about the Somerset Rivers Authority's funding, and point 2 says consider the level of funding available. I can't remember that word being used. I mean, what does consider mean? What does that record say we've decided to do? It sounds like we didn't decide to do anything.
Mr. Wooldridge, do you want to comment? Page 20.
To Councillor Stanton's point, yeah, I mean, that should say, again, these are one of the recommendations from memory that go forward to executive. So this is, again, it considered the level of funding, including the committee's concern, overall resources. Yeah, I think there's something there more about the wording of that. So it considered and reviewed the level of funding available.
Yeah, I think something a little bit more positive would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay. With that amendment, are members happy with the rest of the minutes? Okay, thank you. Are there any issues that anybody wishes to raise arising from them? No? Good, thank you. Are there any declarations of interest, please? No, thank you. We have no public questions that have been submitted on this occasion. So we will move to item 5, which is the Scrutiny Corporate Resources Outcome Tracker, and I will invite Mr. Wooldridge to present an update on it.
Thank you, Chair. And again, hopefully it's self-explanatory. This item effectively captures actions and matters which the committee have previously identified for progress. I think like most trackers, I would probably encourage members, if they do have questions, focus mainly on those that are either in amber or in red. Fortunately, you will see that there are none of them that are red.
Thank you. Does any member wish to comment? Councillor Stanton.
Yeah, same point, Mr. Chairman. As I may just note, page 36, point 2 at the bottom, consider the level of fund. If we could make that consider and review, that would be better.
So if we add and review. Right. Anything else on the outcome tracker? No, thank you very much. So we will then move to item 7. And this is the General Fund Revenue and Capital Budget Monitoring Report. And I will ask Councillor Lation to introduce the item, please. Councillor Lation.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'll start with an apology for splitting up the Q3 papers. With performance and risk, we'll come to executive in March and then to scrutiny to, I think, the same date, 25th of March. And whilst that is not what we intended when we talked about keeping all the quarter papers together, I think it is really important that we have the Q3 paper before budget setting, because it puts the budget for next year in context of how things are going this year. And as I always keep saying, the thing that's most important from budget monitoring is that ability of members to see trends, either in the negative way or in a positive way. And I think that's incredibly important for all members to see that and have that knowledge before we actually move towards budget setting. So there is good news in this report, Chair, but there is also concerning figures of the service overspend. So whilst we are looking at a much improved situation for the council overall, the service overspend and how that trend has continued now for frankly as many years as I've been a councillor, particularly at the county council. So with my colleague Councillor Shearer right behind me, she and I share this conversation regularly. So when I express my concerns about children's services and particularly the costs of placement, even though we have Homes and Horizons in Somerset and we will be expanding that, I still have that very significant concern. You will know, I'm sure every member knows across all of the upper tier authorities in the country now about the government and what's generally called the SEND deficit. It's actually the high needs block deficit, and that government 90% grant, a high needs stabilisation grant, I think it's called officially. But that is not just a given. We have to have, Department for Education have to accept our SEND reform plan, and we have to deliver it. Putting it forward is one thing, delivering it is quite another thing. And so we have that to the end of March 26. We still have another 2 financial years until the end of the statutory override, the end of financial year 27-28, and we don't yet, I'm looking at Mr. Heafy as I say this, we don't yet have indication from government of how those 2 years may or may not be covered. So within this paper, you will see on page 57 of the papers I'm on, number 5 under General Fund Revenue, you will see our recommendation that was to put back £8 million for a contribution to the DSG reserve. So this is a newly named, newly formed reserve. And this is something where we can be in a better place doing that because we can quantify the risk to this council now if that SEND reform plan is accepted and delivered. we can quantify that risk, and we can know that that £8 million reserve is prudent and sensible. We've then got 2 more years that we have to consider. So we're kind of in a better place, but we are not beyond this, and we're not past it. And anyone who's heard the news this morning will know that with the white paper, there is now considerable amount of concern continuing, particularly from parents and carers of children who may or may not have an EHCP. So I think it's really important that members understand where we are at Q3, which is the end of December, where we are now with that high need stabilisation grant, where we are with the DSG reserve that we are putting forward, and you will see in coming papers for budget setting. So we're in a better place, but we are not clear of our concerns, and that story will continue. So if you have heard on the BBC or anywhere else that this council has been crying wolf, please ignore that. We are still looking at a significant risk going forward, and it is a risk that I quantify by looking at a revenue budget of one of the predecessor councils, say, and having a look at how that figure compares to, say, the biggest of the former district councils. It's still a very significant challenge that we face. So, Chair, I would like to pass over to Mr. Heafy or Ms. Hicks, whoever wishes to take this, if Nicola is willing to give us more of the detail. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. Officer Hicks.
Thank you, and Chair, and thank you, Councillor Lation, for the introduction. So Nicola Hicks, Service Director for Finance and Procurement. So just concentrating on some of the information on page 57 of the pack. So I think the important thing to highlight that Councillor Lation didn't mention is the position we're in with a 99,000 underspend is only in that position because we're actually relying on £43 million worth of exceptional financial support there. So when we talk about an underspend, it's not actually a very true underspend, because actually if we remove that 43 million out of the budget, we would be looking at an overspend of 42 million, as paragraph 6 shows there. So I think that's an important thing to remember in terms of that is only one-off financial support that's been allowed to us in that financial year, and so therefore the services overspend is significantly impacting, and we would be in a far worse position if we didn't have that support. Obviously, at the moment, we've built in the whole £43 million worth of support. MHCLG will be waiting on our outturn position. They'll be waiting on our final accounts to be produced for that financial year before they sign that off and allow us to utilise that. So there's just a caveat there in terms of just we've got that approved in principle, but obviously that is subject to our outturn and having a look at it. Just in terms of the other impact to us is what we've managed to forecast as an underspend in relation to our non-service budget. So this is largely in relation to our treasury management budget. So when the budget was set for 25-26, there was an assumption that we would be in a position of borrowing that amount to fund the capitalisation directive. So we were allowing to borrow for our full EFS amount. So it wasn't just the 43 million there. There was an amount in there for transformation activity. So we allowed for borrowing of that. That's now we're in a position where actually the asset sales that we've been able to achieve means that we are not a council that is in a position where we have to borrow for EFS. So that's a good position in terms of makes us stronger. It's not an additional added revenue cost to us. So that's a good position, but it does mean that then we're able to show some underspend in terms of us originally forecasting that we were going to borrow that amount. What's also happened is, which is one of the reasons we also wanted to bring this paper before we bring the budget papers, is what we've done with our capital programme. So we've done a significant amount of work looking at the profile of spend of the capital programme, also around are we fully utilising all external funding, section 106 still, that is going towards our capital programme. Also, are we still on track and able to deliver the very vast capital programme that the council has. Members will recall that in previous reports you would have seen underutilisation of where we thought we were going to be in terms of the spend of that profile, and so we've reflected some of that and been quite prudent in our approach of looking at realistically what can we deliver of our capital programme. And as part of the budget setting papers, we have made some recommendations for a few things to be removed from the capital programme that haven't are either underspends and aren't going to be fully utilised as originally forecast, or the fact that the projects haven't actually moved since we became one on vesting day. So that's part of the budget setting papers, but that has the knock-on effect that when you have a reduced capital programme, a reduced reliance on external borrowing, the impact will be that there is a revenue gain to that. So we've been able to forecast that movement in this paper in terms of this financial year, the amount we won't have to borrow, and therefore we will have a saving in our treasury terms, but we can also roll that forward into the future year to have a look at that. So that's one of the things we've built into this paper. Just as you go down in terms of Councillor Lation had already mentioned about the services overspend, the key variances and movements are listed on page 61. It will be no surprise to members that the main overspend is in relation to children's families and education. So you will see there's a movement there of a further forecast overspend of 6.9 from that was reported in Q2. So significant amount of forecast there in terms of external placement and send transport expenditure. So members will recall when you see the budget papers as well, you've seen the added pressure growth that has gone into the budget for 26-27. That is because despite the efforts of the service to try and mitigate that spend, we are seeing that they can't mitigate that entirely, and some further transformation activity is needed to have a look at how we are addressing some of the impact of that pressure and growth in that area. So some of that will carry forward into 26-27, and that's where we've allowed that budget provision as we've set the budget. The other one to highlight in there in terms of community, place and economy, there's been a positive decrease from that was reported in Q2. So you can see there's a movement of 1.5 million there. So I think the service are doing all that they can to try and mitigate what was originally their forecast overspend there. And I know they are doing some activities such as holding vacancies where they can, and stopping all non-essential spend to try and pull that back within their service budget, directorate budget for the year. As we just go down through the report as always highlights the work that we've done on mitigations. If we go down to the dedicated schools grant section, which is on bullet point 31, which is on page 64 of the report, you will see there we are expecting a cumulative deficit of 107 million in relation to the dedicated schools grant there. So that's a combination of increased volume of EHCP applications and just kind of lower inflationary increases awarded to mainstream school funding. So there's kind of that combination there in terms of that, and that's where it's really important that we do try and mitigate the council in terms of picking up the element that the government won't pick up hopefully through the send reform, as Councillor Lation mentioned. Just in relation to savings there, the table as always shows table 3, which is under bullet point 34, just in terms of the achievement of those savings there in terms of 84%. So we would ideally like 100% as we get to Q3. So it's the final push now for the last quarter of this financial year to ensure what we can get into that achieved box, because obviously that then impacts in our outturn position and as we move forward. If we just go down into the reserve section, you will see there's a table under 42 there, which just shows the use of our contingency reserve and our corporate risk reserve. So you can see that we've tried to minimise the call on those reserves and contingencies as much as possible this financial year. But we just report on the movement there in terms of how it's been utilised. Just in terms of the collection fund, and probably preempting questions that may come in terms of our council tax collection, in terms of it being 81.6 2% against a target of 83.79%. So just to cover off for members, obviously members are aware that we've migrated the system for council tax. So instead of 4 systems, they are now on using 1 system. However, we are still on what they call 4 different platforms. So if you think if we put it all over to NEC, so they're all using the same systems, but we are on 4 platforms. In July, in correlation with the DWP, we will move it into one platform, as they call it in technology terms, trying to explain it, and therefore we were in a much stronger position. But at the moment, for processing, we are still working as 4 geographical areas until we do that merge into 1. When we've done the work to move them all across to NEC, we did actually have a downtime in total of about 9 weeks. So as you will anticipate, with downtime then becomes backlogs in terms of the transactions coming into the council and what we're able to clear. So just for some context for members, we currently receive about 3,000 transactions a week in terms of council tax and benefits. We are clearing at the minute, with some additional capacity that's been brought in from NEC, we're clearing 5,000 a week. So we are clearing more than we are receiving, but obviously we do have a small backlog there, and that will be impacting our collection rate. And it means that whilst we had system downtime, some of the recovery was not done as originally scheduled. So we are catching up, and we are in a position which is improving, but I still think we've got a bit of work to do there, and we have brought some additional capacity into NEC to help them clear some of our transactions. And obviously, as all of the individuals in that team get more used to the system, they will speed up in terms of what they're checking and their processing time. But it's like with anything, when you start using something, you are slower than when you become proficient in that system. So just wanted to cover off a bit of context there, but I'm sure I'll take any further questions on that as we go through. And then just in terms of capital, as we move down, you can see in paragraph 54 there, just talk about a slippage there of 45 million in relation to the capital programme, with the spend where we thought we would be at the Q3 to where we actually are. And some of that is addressed on page 70 in terms of highlighting to members there the main capital projects that are behind in terms of the original forecasts of spend there. But happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Heafy, do you want to add anything at this point?
I think for this point, Chair.
Thank you very much. So at the moment, I have 3 members who've asked to speak. The first of whom is Councillor Trimnell.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. Councillor Leyshawn, you said earlier that, and forgive me because I forgot which bit of the paper, because of course I'm trying to do stuff and it's not, but you said further stuff is coming in March, and it will come to executive and it will come to corporate and resources, a further part of this paper. But I note that corporate and resources again falls after executive next month, and this is also retrospective. This was done 12 days ago. This was looked at, discussed and agreed upon, and yet again we're looking at it retrospectively. I have so many papers to look at this week. I've got executive, I've got adults on Thursday. It looks like I may end up picking up another meeting, and so I'm just thinking it feels really hard to be looking at something that you feel, what's the point in looking at this now, other than for my own information? So that was just a point that I wanted to make, because it's just making it really difficult. Hundreds of pages, so many appendices and things as well. You know, trying to wade through all of that is it feels like this week is a minefield, and obviously the days preceding it. But I do have a couple of questions regarding this. So on page 65, you've got about the undeliverable or ongoing savings, and there are some explanations about it in the text, but I just wanted to find out what happens to those? Do they just get rolled back in? It seems to say that you'll just try and find it from somewhere else, but I'm thinking if there's always somewhere else to find it, why weren't we identifying those savings in the first place? And maybe we are, and maybe I'm being harsh, but I just wanted to find that out. I wanted to find out as well the cost of recovering uncollected council tax. is it smaller than the amount of money that we recover? Do we break even on that? Because I imagine that it's an awful lot of work. Having dealt with some cases in my area where, you know, people are resistant, they do because they cannot afford it, etc. So I just wonder how effective it is in terms of bringing in a net income. And then finally, with regards to EFS, I may be behind the loop on this. I missed some of executive last week. But do we know what is it published what we've asked for, and when do we hear?
It's a lot of questions there, Chair. I'm very willing to start, and then I'm sure I'll be looking for Mr. Heafy and Ms. Hicks. I can't call you Officer Hicks. I find it difficult to say Officer Hicks because it always makes me think of what was the cartoon that had, was it Officer Dibble?
Yeah.
I always think of that. So let me start, Councillor Triminal, by saying welcome to my world. So we've got here Q3 for 25-26. We've got audit committee, which is finishing off 24-25, and we've got budget setting for 26-27. So I'm completely with you there. I find it difficult too. And to keep jumping back and forth, I completely understand your point. I do think there is a point to it though, and I think it's really important that, as I said in my introduction, that all members have the chance to see Q3 and the forecasting that is in Q3 for the end of the financial year before setting the budget. And I think it would be very remiss of us if we did not make that information available to all members. On the undeliverable savings, when you get to the budget setting, you will see those savings reversed out. I think I'm right in saying. So you will see those undeliverable and the ones that are accepted as undeliverable. So the ones in the right-hand column, you will see those reversed out in the budget setting for 26-27. On uncollected council tax and debt levels, this is something that I recall quite well from my days as a district councillor, that they divide into those who can't pay for any reason. And I remember council tax arrears by being written off under pink papers for somebody, say, who had died with no estate and with council tax arrears. So I think that there was less of that work done on the run up to vesting. And I can see that there will be a significant piece of work to get us to that place that Nicola, if you don't mind me calling Nicola, where we need to get to that place by July when we get all of it onto the one NEC platform. It has been a massive piece of work to get us there. It was always inevitable as part of LGR. I talk to plenty of other councils now who are going forward towards LGR, and you know, they always say, what was the worst bit? And I go, don't forget revs and bends. It's really big, and it is, as Councillor Filmer has said at a number of meetings, and I always remember this, nobody thinks about it, nobody talks about it until it goes wrong, and then everyone knows about it. So, and the other one on exceptional financial support and capitalisation directive, as Nicola has already said, we don't know until we get to the year end exactly what the draw is on capitalisation directive in the current year. But it is in the budget papers for 26-27. And I believe that we will be expecting to hear something, I don't know what yet, from government today. Which I'll be jolly glad if we do, because we've got executive on Wednesday. So Monday to Wednesday, it's not much time, but it's better than the other way round. Thank you.
Mr. Heafy.
And thank you, Chair. And if I could just add to that point, on the savings point, the principle that we follow in this organisation as most is that directors are responsible for managing their budgets within the envelope that's given to them and for achieving the savings that are allocated to them. And all directors sign up to an accountability statement. So I will be delivering this, I will find savings. So that's the principle we adopt. Sometimes savings prove more difficult than originally thought to get. Sometimes they are delayed by timing, can't achieve them now, but we will be able to next year. So they remain in the unachievable category. But sometimes for reasons of, we've looked into this one, for instance, the contract won't allow us to do that and we simply can't do it. That becomes undeliverable. And there's no point at that point in carrying on with that saving. It doesn't mean, however, we won't ask for further savings to be identified. The very fact they're not being identified is exactly the point you're making. If they were there to identify in the first place, we'd have had them in there. So it becomes ever harder to do that. So wanted to make the point on that. On exceptional financial support, we are expecting an announcement in Parliament today around exceptional financial support, and we will be having conversations today and tomorrow with government on where we get to. The ask at the end of the day was for 25 million of exceptional financial support.
So can I just come back? So that's more capitalisation? Is that the plan?
It's a capitalisation direction for 25 million pounds in respect to 26-27 only, and a further 5 million for transformation, but that's a rollover of the existing transformation. So that will be the ask, funded by capital receipts.
Yeah, do you know, I find it so hard as well because I've been going through the exec papers as well, the budget papers, and I find it difficult to identify which one I'm talking about half the time. So I don't want to roll into Wednesday's discussion, if you see what I mean, but that helps. Thank you.
And one of the appendices in the budget does take you through that balance, so I can take you through that on Wednesday.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hobhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A minor point to start with, the index on the bottom of the chart has got the wrong colour for the undeliverable ongoing. Just a minor thing. My question is about the 11.495 million overspend in the children's budget, and I want to be told about what the government are doing, whether it's the 74 million send write-off or whether it's the 105 million write-off that they're writing off, and to also understand the EHCP, we were way behind, and has the increase in the numbers been due to the fact we've caught up, or that we've got a vast increase in children who are needing to be put through the system?
Thank you, Councillor Hobhouse. So the send proposals are evolving at the moment, and as you'll have read on the BBC today, there'll be further announcements in government, followed undoubtedly by further announcements that will come from the Department for Education and MHCLG on how that then plays through. What we do know at the moment is we expect to end the year with a deficit of 116.8 million on the high needs block. So you recall that Officer Hicks, you recall that Nicola brought out in there 107.8 million pounds as being the GSG deficit. Within that, there's 116 million of high needs block deficit. The other three blocks, which relate to early years, central service, etc., are in surplus. So that's where we stand on that one, 116. At the moment, the government seem to be saying, we believe they're saying, that there will be available to us 90% of that sum. So that'll be 105 million available to us for the period to March 2026. So that will offset that 116 million with approximately 105 million. Excuse me, I'm talking round numbers, but so that leaves therefore about 11 million that we will need to find from our own reserves in order to close that gap, or we have to deliver more on the deficit management plan that council approved in September to reduce that number still further. We have to keep working hard on that deficit management plan. It doesn't take that away, because that's the way we get our 11 million down to an even lower figure. What we don't know as yet is for 26-7 or for 27-28 what that's going to look like. That remains a key risk for us. Government could decide not to fund it at all, and you need to be thinking that the deficit in each of those years is likely to be of the order of 70 million pounds in each year going forward. So that presents a risk. It could be slightly less, it could be slightly more, by the way, but we are still seeing huge numbers coming through. And until government tell us what that will be, we hold that risk. So it could be no grant at all. It could be a continuation at 90% for each of those years, subject to the production and delivery of the SEND reform plan, or it could be a tapering down. There are three real options that we are looking at in that area. I'm hoping that today government's announcement will give us an idea of where they're going on that one, but as yet I can't say that we or any authority know that at this moment in time, so we're waiting to see. In terms of the numbers being processed, the numbers are very low at the moment. I think it's between 2 and 5% at the moment of cases being processed within the time. That is just because of the sheer flood of people coming through. The lack, particularly, the lead member may want to comment on this, but the lack particularly of educational psychology posts or filled posts. We have 28 vacancies in that area, and at the moment we can't fill them fast enough. Of course, what that's doing is delaying costs, because these EHCPs are not on the system, and as soon as they come onto the system, that you're going to see the cost of that go up again. It'll be another one going forward. Not a reason not to do it. Parents need to make sure that their children have been assessed, but we are struggling, like many authorities, to recruit the sheer number of educational psychologists needed to deal with this situation.
Councillor Shearer.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Heafy. Mr. Heafy, you've explained it brilliantly as ever, so I appreciate that for understanding it. I think the only one I want to add on was, for the first time, I was in a lead member network meeting about a week ago, and it was the first time I'd actually heard it corroborated that we've had a 30% increase in the requests in the last year in the requests for EHCPs, which we certainly didn't budget for or expect to have. And it is compounded by the fact that, as Matifi says about, I've got to say Clive, it's easier. Sorry, forgive me, Clive, all personal. It is hard to get those educational psychologists. They are in short supply all over the country, and it is really difficult to keep them. We've got the vacancies. The thing I would say, though, is that 30% is the first time it's been corroborated, I'm aware of, that actually the delay in the white paper, and in fact the trailing of the white paper from last summer on SEND, is now being accredited as the reason why more people are coming forward. It's a little bit when you have, when stamp duty is going to go up, everybody tries to buy their house before the stamp duty comes up. I'm not trying to be bad about parents doing this. Parents, of course, want to make sure that if there's any kind of change, they want to make sure their children's needs are met as quickly as possible. And it has actually been, the two things have been aligned. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shearer. Councillor Johnson.
Okay, so we have an £11 billion deficit likely after the 90%, and I guess that you've only put 8 million aside because that's all you have to put aside. How are we looking forward to dealing with 144 million by 2028, and have those figures come from other councils as well as this council to explain to the government how they cannot leave us hanging?
In terms of the in-year position, obviously in this report we're setting aside the 8 million, as you correctly say. The aim is to keep the pressure on departments, on the council, to get the underspend to a lower level by the year end. And should that be the case, my recommendation at year end will be that we prioritise putting the remaining 3 million aside, so that we've got it covered from underspends as a first call on any underspend, and that protects the council then from having to dip into its reserves. So if we can't do that, if the underspends don't materialise, then we will have to dip into our reserves to the tune of £3 million, which would be unfortunate if we did, and therefore not my preferred approach. In terms of future years, government is well aware of the concerns expressed by all sorts of local government bodies, every council, every upper tier authority, etc., as to the uncertainty, which is why I'm very much hoping there will be something today. I think we're all hoping and probably expecting, if I'm being honest, that there'll be something in the announcement today that will give an indication of where government want to go on this, because it does leave us high and dry. And my successor will have a position to think about for a section 114 if, for instance, there was no grant coming forward in 26-27, and 27-28, they will have to consider whether the impact on our reserves would be so great that that would still leave us in a Section 114 situation. So at the moment, we're not there because there's uncertainty, and the way government have treated it for 1 year, we can reasonably expect they will do something in the next 2 years. But that's a reasonable assumption rather than anything that we've seen in writing that can corroborate that.
Councillor Johnson.
Hi, Clive. Thanks for that. I mean, it's obviously really concerning, the shortage of educational psychologists, and I understand it's something like a 3 or 4 year training. Are the government putting any money behind increasing the number of training opportunities for educational psychologists, do you know? And is there anything we can do as a council to be training our own, you know, which would certainly serve as well to be able to clear some of the backlog?
I think from what's been in government announcements, they've certainly acknowledged the need for more educational psychologists. So again, we await the discussion paper today on on how that's going to go, whether government want to support local government more on putting educational psychologists in. As far as the training goes, I'd have to defer to the Director of Education for that. I don't know whether the lead member may want to say something, but I'm not conscious of what we're doing around that area.
Sorry, so just happy to come in momentarily. Amelia's just in another call at the moment. She's going to be here in about 10 minutes, time. Forgive me, because when we changed the agenda around, she was coming in for this particular piece. But I can certainly ask the question, because as the Vice Chair mentions, you know, these are professional psychological, psychology kind of positions. So it's not, we do an awful lot of growing our own social care workers, FIS workers, all kinds of people within the council as much as we can. Having just gone to an award place when we were giving out their qualifications, I'm not sure whether we could do that in-house, but certainly I will give the director a ping now and see if she knows more about it, so she can come in as soon as she's ready to get over across here. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, it's my understanding that an educational psychologist training largely involves being employed somewhere to do your training. And, you know, it'd be great to know if there's anything more we could do as a council with, you know, maybe we need government support with funding, but largely it's in work training that I'm aware of.
Thank you. Councillor Seed.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm a little disturbed that I haven't heard things which convince me there are spend to save calculations going on here, which might allow you to trump the market, for example. So just looking at the current discussion on educational psychology, we've clearly got a problem of our inability to process is leading to a backlog which we're carrying into a year which doesn't get a subsidy, because we've got a 9% subsidy on this year. Somebody should have fag-packeted how much we could save by spending money on renting additional capacity at extreme cost in order to overcome that, and whether it paid off. In business, you would do that. You would bring in a consultant to increase your capacity, knowing that you're never going to be paying that rate for any in the long run, but in order to get the throughput. Similarly, on the tax collection rate, I'm afraid I've got my fag packet out, and it looks to me as though the 2.17% that we're behind this year is about 6.1 million. So that's quite a large number when you consider how much it costs us to finance that, because of course that's the impact of carrying that drag on the revenue budget. And I think it's likely to be somewhere between 0 and 300k, depending on how long. But if we persistently carried a 6 million deficit, it would be 300k over the year. So why didn't we anticipate that operating a fifth system, and I don't hold there's a permanent drag on operating multiple systems. Yes, it takes a while to learn the system, but eventually you're as quick on each system because you've learned it, and the amount of work that actually matters is the assessment of the getting tax bills and assessing claims and so on and so forth, which is actually system agnostic. You're going to be doing that as a person, making decisions as a person. Then you've actually got to tell the computers what to do. once you're past the learning curve, you know, why are we persisting with this? It's been a while that we've had the system in, and in any case, as it has a straightforward revenue cost, being late on collecting revenues, why didn't we? Well, one, why wasn't the need anticipated? But given that a need has arisen, why haven't we looked at expending money to try and split the difference? You know, catch up on that 300k, reducing the cost of financing, because we can't afford the financing. You know, are we doing spend to save calculations on the fly then, and working out whether it makes sense to reduce the cost of our borrowing by pushing harder on getting money in and getting money in?
It's not always as simple as just spending money on invest to save. There's a whole myriad of reasons. On the first example of educational psychologists, there is a national scheme run by government, etc., and I'm sure the Director of Education will tell you the work we're doing around that. But there is a national shortage of people to do this work at this moment in time, and the training takes a number of years to do and to go through before you can become unsupervised and qualified to do that work. So, you know, there is long-term investment into this situation, but not necessarily one that's going to have an immediate remedy. The same on debt. We have debt as a council from a number of sources, from council tax, from business rates, from current tenants on the housing account, from former tenants on the housing account, and from trade creditors as well around what we call sundry debts. So all of those are things that we look at being as effective as we can in collecting the debts. When it comes to council tax, people know the way they can pay their council tax. This often is about enforcement of payments and then going down. We use similar processes to what you'd know in business as dunning letters, in terms of writing to remind people and offering help and support, etc., before we eventually go down a more legal route. So we'll follow all of those processes. And again, just by having more people in doing more legal work won't necessarily give you a payback on that. We need to balance that side of understanding people's circumstances, the reasons for not paying, and then chasing to follow that debt. We rarely let a debt go. We will follow that debt all the way through for a number of years. And when councils monitor council tax debt, they'll collect a certain amount in year, a certain amount the following year, a certain amount the following year. But if it does go to legal action and an attachment of earnings or something of that kind of nature, then the courts will often find in our favour to carry on enforcing that, albeit it may be £1 a week or £2 a week. So the payment of that is long term. Again, I'm not sure that just bringing in more people would necessarily solve that problem. What I think would be helpful for the committee is to look at the totality of our debt at a point in the future, a report on the totality of our debt and the actions that we're taking to enforce against each of those relative those debt areas, so you can understand that and ask the questions more generally, if that would help.
Councillor Seaver, you want to come back?
Yes, just wanted to push back a little bit. I asked whether the calculation was being done to you've told me lots of things I already knew about how difficult it is, but it is not normal to have quite such a large gap at this time in the year for councils in this county. So yes, I know how this situation arises. My point was, it's got a cost, and in commerce, you would dynamically reassess every day whether you needed to do something a bit more. And in this particular case, it's the golden nugget. This is the cash flow coming in. You can do a lot more good getting after the cash flow, but also with respect to the tax collection, it was a foreseeable problem. We should have actually budgeted for any frictions in the main project. And we should actually, you know, if it is down to legal work, let's not blame it on multiple systems. Let's blame it on we haven't got enough lawyers. Lawyers are easier to find, but I'll bet even educational psychologists can be retained with you wanted to take your pension, we're going to pay you a bonus to stay. Have we got any unemployed but recently employed educational psychologists that could be acquired? This is a massive market across the UK. You know, it's not that there are none, and we don't need millions. We need a few more to improve it. One more would improve it from today, but instead we seem to be accepting a fait accompli. and I'm not really getting there's a rational day-to-day consideration of this is a pain to me and it's costing the council money we haven't got. Is there any way of improving the situation a tiny bit? Not fixing the world, but just improving a tiny bit. And I'm not getting that flavour from the explanation, or from not answering the, well, yes, we do that as managers, you know, which would have been a better. Is that the case?
I've got a chance that before. I can see that.
Right, I have a number of hands up actually. I've got Officer Hicks, Councillor Shearer, Councillor Lation. Please fight amongst yourselves over who would like to respond most fully. I'll start with Officer Nick.
So,
Officer Hicks, thank you.
Councillor Seeb, I'd probably be honest to say I haven't done a calculation to say what the loss is. So that's an answer to that question. What I have done is in the restructure that's going forward of the Revs and Bend service off the back of now being on one system, there is a dedicated debt recovery team going in. We inherited a variety of legacy debt with each of the legacy councils. I inherited some having dedicated debt recovery officers, some having not. So we're trying to resolve all of that, and debt recovery is one of my focuses.
Thank you, Nicola, very much. Amelia Walker is online. I wonder if I could possibly ask Amelia to comment on what we've just been discussing. Amelia.
Yes, so I hope I can respond appropriately. I have just joined the meeting from a prior one, so hopefully I'm able to answer the question. But please do come back to me if I've not addressed the core. So we do grow our own in relation to educational psychologists. We have relationships with local universities. We bring in assistant educational psychologists who are pre-qualification. It's just to have to be aware that the pipeline is obviously very long because a PhD is a 5-year program. So the issue that we have is not with the lack of relationship or the lack of foresight. It's just that it takes a very, very long time to grow an educational psychologist. The secondary issue is about our competitiveness in the market. So there are EPs who are qualified, but there is so much work now that the private sector rates are completely in excess of what any local authority pays, and Somerset is a low-paying local authority in the market. So the terms and conditions in the private sector are extremely favourable, and the pay is extremely high. So any time in that position, your market competitiveness is going to be very severely impacted. So as many new EPs as you might bring in, you will be losing them out the back door. And that is obviously something that we are working with, looking at the moment at all options in terms of backlog clearance, in terms of our base provision, our capacity, and the costs involved in that. And finance colleagues are helping us with those options appraisal activities.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Shearer, did you want to say anything? No, thank you.
Sorry, no,
Councillor Lation.
Amelia.
Chair, I just wanted to point out at the end of Q2, I think members were equally concerned that we were over target at that point with council tax collection, but it did come with a health warning from Sean Warren, the head of revenues and benefits, that figures would move around until all of the migration was complete and we were at the end of Q4. So I think it is fair to say that we need to allow the team some more time to get us to a steady position and to understand exactly where we will be at the end of the financial year.
Okay. Councillor Filmer. Oh, sorry.
So just to end that point then, so in terms of cash management, obviously we are a net borrower as an authority, as most are, but we hold balances of around at the moment 179 million, I think, set out in Appendix L for you. So we have cash in the bank because government often pay us well in advance. So this isn't a cash issue for us. but the biggest source of debt that we can sort very, very quickly is to deliver on the SEND reform plan and get £105 million worth of cash in the autumn, which at the moment that cash is out of the council's cash flow and supporting DSG related, high needs block related activity. So when government pay that money over, that cash will come into us. That's the biggest single debt that we can resolve at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Filmer.
Thank you, Chairman. It was just a query. Mine relates mainly to the capital fund, the general fund capital programme. Page 71 has a table 6. We've heard that we're looking at a variance on that of an underspend of about 26 million this year. From what I can see from that table, it looks like in the first 9 months of the year we've spent 81 million and we're forecasting we're going to spend 89 million in the next 3 months. Obviously, I understand that some capital will be back towards the back end of the year, but are we actually convinced that we can spend 89 million pounds worth of capital expenditure in the last 3 months of the year when we've spent less than that in the first 9?
So looking at what happened last financial year, that's not unusual. So there does seem to be the last quarter of the financial year seems to be a larger amount of spend. So I have questioned it. So we will see how it comes out at outturn.
Thank you. Are there any other members who wish to ask questions on this item? No. So the recommendations before us are on page 58 and 59. Obviously, members have raised some additional concerns and probed various areas of the recommendations this morning, but I'm not really conscious that there's necessarily anything to be added to those points regarding the recommendations as approved by the executive on the 11th of February. Although we do obviously express our ongoing concern regarding the DSG and elements associated with it. So I think we need to put that on record, that continues to be a matter of considerable concern to us. Is there anything else that anybody wishes to add? If not, I will ask that we support the recommendations that are laid before us this morning. Are we happy with them? Right, thank you. Well, that means that Officer Hicks and Mr. Heafy can now go and mentally prepare themselves for the interesting day ahead of them. We'll look forward to hearing more as quickly as possible about the outcome of their conversations. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We will move back now to agenda item 6, which is the Housing Revenue Account Revenue and Capital Budget Monitoring Report. And I will again invite Councillor Lation to introduce this item.
Thank you very much, Chair. I won't say much in introducing this item, except to say that I'm always pleased to see our officer for the HRA, Kerry Prisco, in the room, and would like to commend the fact that Kerry has such an extensive knowledge of the HRA. That is both the in-house HRA and the homes in Somerset are part of the HRA. And it is, I think, again, really important that members see the position that the HRA is in at the end of Q3 as we move towards budget setting. And what I believe is the greatest ambition we can show within borrowing constraints in order to get more housing for social rent in Somerset as soon as possible. And I've been really interested to understand more, particularly since the opening of the housing at Rainbow Way in Minehead, about how councils are limited in how much build they can do for social rent housing, which everybody nationally seems to agree should be a national priority, and how much of that is because of the borrowing that councils had to take out to pay to government Somerset is a total of £133 million. That does give us greater flexibility in what we can do. But a leader of one of the London councils made the point that although I think it was Southwark Council, had land and had planning permission already in place, they were not able to build out more housing for social rent because they could not afford more borrowing. So I think as we look at Q3 and then as we go into budget setting, I think it's really important that we understand that. And I'm very happy to hand over to Kerry Prisco, Chair.
Thank you very much. Officer Prisco.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Lucian. Hello, my name's Kerry Prisco. I'm the Strategic Finance Business Partner for the HRA. And the report today is for the HRA on Q3 outturn forecast position for 25-26. So on pages 39 to 40 of the report, this summarises that we are presenting a positive outturn position at the present, a net underspend of 0.98 million, so just under 1 million underspend. Just a reminder, the position at Q1 was an underspend of 1.249 and Q2 was an underspend of 0.286. So there has been a movement of 694k since Q2. And you can see this summarised in table 1 on page 44. So the majority of this movement since Q2 is to do with the increase in the capital slippage being reported in this quarter. So what that means is it's because we're spending less on capital programme this financial year, it means that our projections around what we thought we would have to borrow to finance a capital programme has reduced. And because that borrowing has reduced, that means the cost of our borrowing in terms of interest payments is also reduced. So that is the majority of the movement in the revenue account underspend forecast for the year. This has been offset in part due to some movement on responsive voids projections, so about 325k on responsive voids. So the reasons for this is to do with a number of temporary decants now being required to prepare those properties to be re-let from a temporary accommodation point of view. And there's also been some unplanned clearance and safety works for development sites, and also a rise in some complex voids leading to extensive works. We've also got a little bit of movement, about 213k on responsive repairs. So again, from a responsive point of view, and it says it in the name really, it's their updated kind of forecast position at present. And there's a little bit on compliance works as well. So in terms of more further information on those variances, you can see that on pages 44 to 47. In terms of how that impacts the general reserves position, well, the current balance and the projected balance is staying kind of fairly stable at around 17 million, because we've also got some money has been drawn down or expected to be drawn down from reserves to fund the purchase of new properties as per full council recommendations earlier this year. In terms of the capital programme on page 47, just a reminder that the total approved capital programme for the HRA to be spent over the next 5 years is 268 million, of which they plan to spend 79 million this financial year. So based on the 79 million, their outturn position is 51 million. So we do have an underspend about 25 mil. So the reasons for this, so about 22.6 is being proposed to be carried forward to the next financial year. The majority of that does relate to delayed development programmes, and there's a number of different new build programmes and kind of Section 106 acquisitions that have been delayed, and they're still progressing, but they're now expected to be delivered in the next financial year. There's also some expectations around some budgets to be removed at 2.6 million, and this relates to some late changes on the social housing decarbonisation funds, so late information coming through from government after we've set the budgets. So that's about 1.2 million, also about 0.28 million on vehicles, and that's a change in IFRS 16. And then also some major works, kind of surplus budgets that might be proposed to be returned in the outturn report. But any proposals will be put through in the outturn report. This is just kind of give you an early indication of what might happen. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Fulmer.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of things, if I could. One, you mentioned the issue of complex voids, and that was causing us more of a problem in delaying Is that a problem that we're seeing that you expect to move on, that there's going to be more of these complex voids, and what's the cause behind those, and how are we dealing with it? And the other question was, you mentioned there was the delay in the delivery of housing, the 20 odd million that's being rolled forward. Are those delays primarily internal delays, or are they external delays? And if they're internal, what are we doing to make sure they don't happen next year?
Thank you. Officer Hall.
Yeah, firstly, my apologies for not being with you this morning. We are actually at the opening ceremony of Lavinia House this morning, which is one of our housing projects. So apologies for not being there in person. In terms of the complexity of the voids, a variety of reasons, really. So we still have some challenges around the quality of homes coming back to us. And we've changed the voids process to help manage that pre-void inspection and try and turn those around more quickly. We are seeing some more major changes and upgrades being required. So Duke Street Flats is an example where we've had to create some of those properties as void and actually deliberately decant tenants in order to undertake some of those major works. So some of it is related to just the age of the stock, and some of it is a more general updating of the regulations that cover housing standards and decent homes, and therefore the amount of work necessary at the point at which that property becomes void. In terms of the delays, they're external. So predominantly we are undertaking regeneration schemes like the one I've just referred to, we're up today, as well as acquisitions through Section 106 in the open marketplace. We do have, therefore, build challenges in the external marketplace. We had a break-in at Penley House, which has caused a delay on the handover of that project, and that'll mean that project slips into another year. So there are external delays causing pressures to us, but they are movement of years rather than delays that would, excuse me, rather than delays that would cause any financial penalty to the council or otherwise challenge the delivery overall. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Are there any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? Councillor Seeb.
Thank you, Chairman. The issue of being able to afford to build seems to centre on borrowing. You'll have to forgive me. I want to understand where we are in terms of the level of borrowing we have versus the level we're allowed at the moment, and whether that is a regulatory cap or an affordability cap.
Hello, thank you. So in terms of the HRA's affordability to actually build, so as per the budget setting report, you would have seen that we have to do a number of assessments around the kind of key metrics to make sure that all the proposals put forward are affordable and viable, not only in the short term, kind of medium and long term. So we look at what's called interest cover. That's making sure that the HRA revenue account is able to offset all the expenditure and still leave room to finance its debt. So whilst we have a minimum of 100% requirement, we would prefer to move to 125%, and we do that within the budget setting report. It does explain that. In terms of, you mentioned about how much are we allowed to borrow? So the government did used to have what was called a borrowing cap imposed on HRAs. That has been removed, and I can't remember top of my head exactly what year that was, but it's been quite a few years now since that borrowing cap has been removed. But to make sure that we are making sure that we are safe within ourselves, we do look to that interest cover metrics every single year as part of the refresh to do that.
Thank you. And Officer Hall online
just for clarity, so it's an internal percentage that we've set as a policy at 100%.
So the 100% minimum is something that our 151 would advise us to make sure we meet. It's best practice. In terms of 125%, that is kind of industry best practice. So we liaise with an independent external advisor around our HRA business plan every single year to kind of make sure that we are kind of challenged on that position and looking across the sector as well.
Thank you. Are there any other points, please, from members of the committee? No? Well, in that case, the recommendations, which you will see on page 40 are that we have considered and commented on the recommendations that were approved by the executive on the 11th of February, noting the HRA forecast underspend, the impact on the HRA General Reserve of the underspend, and noted the forecast outturn position of the capital programme of 54.142 million for 25-26. I don't believe there's anything that we want to add to that. So may I see everybody in favour? Yes. Good. Nobody against. Right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for having reached this position rather more quickly in the agenda than we'd expected. I'm therefore going to suggest that we have a comfort break for 10 minutes, and then we will reconvene to deal with item 8 and beyond. Thank you very much. Right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the scrutiny meeting. We move on to agenda item 8, which is the equality objectives and strategy, which you'll find on page 177 to 200 of the committee report. Councillor Smith-Roberts is not with us this morning, so I'm going to ask Officer Tom Rutland to move straight into his report, please. Tom.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors. So as a bit of background before I kind of cover the areas that are within the report and some points of clarity just to provide a bit of context for them. As an organisation, we have a responsibility under the Equality Act 2010 as part of the public sector equality duty to talk about the amount of proactive work that we're going to do in relation to equality. The minimum is a single equality objectives to review every 4 years. For the size of organisation that we are, the expectation will be for us to do more than one equality objective. The legislation and its delightfulness is both responsive and supportive of the organisation size that you are. So for us, it would be larger than one objective for a period of no longer than 4 years going forward. As part of that requirement, we must look at the data in the organisation that we are, both look at how we're working, but also the work that we then need to do to improve the outcomes for those within our communities. So the objectives that you will have identified within the report look at the data that we have as an organisation, both of us as an organisation, but also within the wider community. That's then pulled together and distilled into what areas do we think we might need to do some work on, both for us, but also for the communities that we serve to improve their outcomes and their areas of improvement within their lives, and identify a set of equality objectives that improve those outcomes for those individuals. So what you'll see within the report is the long list that was pulled together based on that data and evidence that we're now out consulting on to identify a shorter list that is a manageable list for us as an organisation. What we tend to aim for is about 4 as an organisation. That feels achievable for us to make progress and make a difference on. We're currently looking at about 5 based on the feedback. So it may be 5, it may be 4. We'll see based on the feedback, based on the engagement that we've had with you and based on the engagement we've had with others, where we head in relation to that. What I will add is there is additional work that will happen above and beyond this. What I don't want you to think is, as an equality service, as an organisation, this is our only commitment around equality and diversity and inclusion. This is part of the suite of work that we will be doing as an organisation and part of the suite of work that we will be doing around improving the outcomes and the functionality that we have. So there are additional almost internal based action plans and work plans that look at how we function as an organisation, improve our commitment to equality, improve our understanding of equality as an organisation, and make sure that we're heading forward in a solid foundation. So the work is not just held within those objectives. There is a suite of other work that happens alongside it as well. That's our internal functionality work rather than our external facing work. So just to provide a bit of that context, because what I have had feedback from people is oh, that's not a lot. It is part of the picture, it is not the full picture, just to give you a bit of that context. The 2 additional items that are within the report, so one is around the equality strategy for us as an organisation, and that is essentially our direction setting and our external evidence direction setting of our commitment to equality, diversity and inclusion. It sets the standard for us as an organisation, but it also sets the standard for the wider community to say this is our commitment, this is what we sign up to, this is where we're heading forward. So again, it plays into that public sector element of our duties around being outward facing and being proactive in the work that we do within the wider community. And then the last set of documentations that fit within the report are around our quality impact assessment process. So again, the process itself is not a legal process, so we do not have a legal requirement to have an equality impact assessment process. What we have a legal requirement to do is to have due regard to the public sector equality duties, and the equality impact assessment process evidences that due regard and provides the evidence for individuals around our thought process around due regard for example, you as decision makers to say, do we fully understand what the due regard is, but also to members of the public around actually have we had that consideration of due regard? Is it well thought through? Is it well evidenced? So the documentation that you have in front of you is a refresh to the IA process that we have, to include children looked after and make a few tweaks around the documentation that's within there. What I will add is this is a refresh for a full review of the equality impact assessment process from April through to about June, July-ish time, where we will fully rip it apart and look at what everyone else does and kind of totally refresh the process and make sure that it is fit for purpose. It is, but where we can improve it and where we can make it more streamlined and more seamless as a process going forward. So again, just to give you a bit of reassurance, this is a refresh to make sure that we're fit for purpose, which we are, and to include those elements that we need to, but we will be doing a fuller refresh going forward of this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would suggest that it might be helpful for members to focus on page 178 and number 3, so that we look at the top 5 objectives. That might be a helpful point for us to concentrate upon. Mr. Sieb, Councillor Sieb.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got 2 points. One's a very general one. Please, 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 can we lose the 3 columns on the assessment form as this iteration of looking at things and go for a single red, amber, green that changes colour from red to amber to green? Because all we have at the moment is a coloured sheet of paper. The colour coding is not helping us at all. And that's the point of a RAG process. So please, can we change the form? I believe you can put embedded formatting in PDFs if you want to. You can certainly do it elsewhere, and you can do it manually. So that was the first one, just a plea. Secondly, going to the objectives, can you give us a little more flavour on this peer-to-peer discrimination in schools context that gets a reference? Firstly, can you give me an example of what sort of thing you're finding in there? Secondly, what is the baseline against which you'll measure for your improvements over the years, and how do you intend to measure?
So the peer-on-peer reporting process is a process as an organisation that we set up. There was originally a best value performance indicator, if one remembers those, that was around discrimination incidents within schools that we as a local authority had a responsibility to record and maintain. That responsibility, as the joy of BVPI's departed, went. As an organisation, we chose to continue with that process. So it's a voluntary recording process for schools around peer-on-peer discrimination that happens within that. So within the reporting mechanism, there is a... Oh.
Sorry, could you expand on peer-on-peer? Do you mean children, staff?
So it's children on child, so it's child on child. It is incidents of that within school. There is a number of different elements that they can record within that process, so it guides them through what they record and how they record it. It is a voluntary process, so no educational establishment has a requirement to record against it. It is up to them whether they choose to or whether they do not choose to. It records both, it records a range of different types of discrimination, so it will have race discrimination, but it will also have the other protected characteristics covered as part of it as well. From a kind of baseline and measuring perspective, my plan will be to take the figure that we currently have at the 1st of April as our baseline
and then work going forward on probably a quarterly basis to establish whether or not we're moving and how we're moving in relation to that reporting mechanism. So what you'll always tend to see is a level of fluctuation as things happen. So for example, we saw with the Stockport incident, that saw an increase in reporting within schools, an increase of incidents within schools. So what we'll need to be is most mature enough to go, are we seeing a downward trajectory? But also, is there a blip that's occurring based on wider community kind of considerations that need to happen within that time? So our hope is we will be mature enough to be able to have that kind of understanding of where we are, whether that kind of overriding figure is going down or whether actually it's sustaining or going up.
Could I just comment that firstly, the council, I'm not sure exactly who was behind it, arranged for us to have some prevent training a while back, and I have to say that was very sobering. And that is where the behaviour is not merely discrimination, it's becoming so extreme that it begins to be a should this person be in some sort of preventative programme. But it's the same bedrock that we need people to be looking at to see where the preventer cases are, and particularly in gender discrimination and in race discrimination. And it seems to me that this proposal that you're putting forward would be a good bedrock, and that by the way the other end of the telescope looks this extreme, might be a good way of getting people to take part. I know it just seems to be an obvious thing to promote. So I like the sound of this.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. I'll just provide a little bit of clarity. So the way in which I always view this is a little bit like it's the canary in the coal mine. It provides us with an understanding whether or not there is increased and raising tension. If that increased and raising tension is happening, we tend to see, and that sustains, that then creates a kind of a situation in a community where actually further increase is acceptable going forward. So for me, this is very much, as you say, the wider end of the telescope, to be able to go, do we understand what's happening within our communities, to be able to then make supportive preemptive actions before we get to the point where this stuff is becoming acceptable going forward. And it marries the work we do with our communities around actually what are we seeing around to prevent, but also what are we seeing around hate crime and other bits that are happening, and how we do preventative work before we get to the pointy end of the stick. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Trimnell.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this, Tom. So I do have a few questions, and I hope they're not going to be awkward or difficult. But I did wonder, the point about work towards being an anti-racist organisation, in what ways are we the opposite would be a pro-racist organisation? I don't believe we are. So are we indifferent to racism? What does it look like at the moment? What work do we have to do to prove that? I don't know where that lies. Where does the racism or the tolerance of or whatever it is lie within the organisation? I wanted to know about, obviously, one of the ones that we wouldn't be carrying forward would be the impact of lack of stable and safe housing on the Gypsy and Traveller community in Somerset. Now, that one is an interesting one, because it sounds as though, because we can't do anything about that, which I thought that we were working towards, that we've got to find ways to manage the impacts. And obviously that hasn't made it onto the list, and I understand that you can't take everything on board. And so it's not a criticism, but I just wondered whether, again, is it a way of not acting on something because we can't? And that was the question. And then Councillor Seeb touched on some of the elements that I was going to ask about the peer-on-peer discrimination, because I worked in education for years, so I'm very familiar with this. So my questions around that were, so this is only in local authority controlled schools. We're not, no, so that we're going to do this in academies as well, or how do we do it? I don't understand. Like, this is our own target that we're going to be, because there's only schools that can do it. We can't make a change in this, can we? We can't directly as a council. We will be encouraging teachers and schools to work on this, which I believe teachers already do. I think when teachers see anything, they counter it. You said it's voluntary, whether it needs to be recorded. So are we asking them to really ensure that they always record it, that we're going to make it less of a voluntary expectation? And how are we going to support schools to meet these targets? And is it because we don't feel schools are doing enough? What it is I'm confused by what we can do as a council, because really it's going to be, you know, on the coalface in the classrooms where these actions are being taken. So forgive me if my questions sound critical. They're not. I'm just trying to understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Never critical, always helpful to have clarity. So let's have clarity. That's why we're here. So I'm going to work from the top down. If anything that I say in my response doesn't make sense or requires further clarity, then please shout. So if we look at the anti-racist element, so what we are not saying by saying we want to be an anti-racist organisation is that we are currently a racist organisation. So it's not a binary thing in relation to that. So what we're saying by making that commitment to us being an anti-racist organisation is that we're going to proactively do things to make sure that we're taking that out and stemming it away from the work in which we're doing. We're making an active commitment to be proactive in the work that we do in relation to this area, and we are going to challenge and put forward. A lot of it is stuff that we already have in place and work that we're already doing, but there is a commitment and further work that we could do to push ourselves as an organisation to be fully committed to that anti-racism view, where you're actively doing things rather than necessarily proactively responding to something. So that's the anti-racism one. You'll face this as a question, so I'll crack on to the others and we'll go from there. So in relation to the Gypsy Traveller one, so the reason why it's not in there is based on the feedback that we've had. So what I've not done and what we've not done through any of this is sift out any of them, because either we've gone, oh, we can't do that, or whatever else it may be. The feedback that we've got has driven the ones that we take forward. So this is from community-based engagement, it's from staffing engagement, it's from a whole myriad of different views. So they are the ones that have thinned that down. What I will say on top of that is we do work outside of those objectives. So as an organisation and as a service and as a kind of within a wider community context, there is other stuff that we do. So this will not be the totality of the commitment and work that we do as an organisation. And I know at the moment we're on the cusp of the traveller accommodation assessment coming out that will give us an idea of the requirements that we've got. And as an organisation, we'll need to do a response in relation to that to go, what's our commitment and where do we go from there? So I think it doesn't stop us doing other stuff above and beyond. It doesn't stop us having further commitment. At the moment, it is not one of the objectives that is being supported by the wider community for us to take forward, which is why the list. If as an organisation we want around this additionally or in another way, then it's a conversation that we can have around actually, do we want to have a statement, a commitment or something in relation to this, and how do we go about doing it? My thought would be in response to the Gypsy Traveller Accommodation Assessment, were a really powerful way of doing it, of going, this is the data and the evidence that's guided us to show the commitment that there should be within the area. This as an organisation is our response to that, rather than possibly separately within a set of objectives somewhere else. It's my own personal view. In relation to the peer-on-peer elements, absolutely agree. A lot of the work will sit with educational establishments. At the moment, the reporting is open to anyone, so it is not local authority purely. It is open to any authority any education establishment that there is in Somerset. Anyone is open to be able to report and record against it. It is voluntary. There is a conversation, of course, that we can have as to whether or not there is a commitment to make it a non-voluntary process, but at the moment it is very much a voluntary process. But there is work that we can do. So we know that we've had some feedback around education establishments wanting some support around incidents that are happening within their settings and how they can effectively respond in relation to that. So that's some really effective support that we can put in place. What we can also do is work with education establishments around the pre-work before the thing happens. So their response is usually quite good, but what's happening within those settings to bring diversity into the organisation, kind of have that conversation around race, around racism, around diversity, what it looks like within that establishment. We could do some really good supportive work and provide some skills and tools to be able to support them around that. We can work effectively with educational settings to be able to say, actually, what support do you need? What does it look like? Where do we go and how do we go about doing it? So I think there is a lot that we can do to be able to provide some support. And I think there is some responsibility for us around the well-being of the young people within that setting that we have as an organisation that we can kind of use as a bit of a levy to be able to support around that. What that specifically looks like is a conversation for us to have once we've got this objective around, okay, so what action do we take and when we do go with it?
Okay, thank you. I mean, I don't particularly have another question. I think I don't know what the question would be about the first point, if you see what I mean. So I think we have to see some of this work roll out. I mean, obviously, this doesn't restrict the scope of the work that's being done. We pick 4 things and that's it. There's no other work to be done. So I totally understand that. I guess I would probably want to know, will this be the venue for reporting back on how these things are proceeding and how frequently we hear, because I don't know what the questions are. I think that's the thing on all of them. I could come back with further questions. You know, with the gypsy traveller community, really the aim is we want them to have those settled, stable homes. That's the goal. And so I don't want to actually just sort of find ways to cope with the impact of not having those, if you get what I mean. So putting that one aside, the other 2, should they come forward, you know, I think the questions will come as we see the work that's being done. That's where I'm coming from. So will you be feeding back to us regularly?
Yes. The frequency of it will vary depending on kind of what the scrutiny committee want and how we can effectively report. So the aim will be that we will produce an annual report that will go to executive, and my aim will be it would come here before it goes to executive to provide them with a refresh and an update of and the direction, the actions and the work that we're doing in relation to this and the progress that we're making it. So the aim will always be that we push that forward and we provide that narrative going forward. I'm more than happy for it to come to this scrutiny committee pre that, absolutely. And if you would like something more frequently, we'd be more than happy to have a conversation around that, what that would look like and how we can effectively do that for you.
Thank you. So just following up something that Councillor Trimmell's raised, in number 2 on page 178, Tom, you're talking about reducing the list of objectives to 4. And then in number 3, we've got the top 5 objectives. So why do we need 5? Why can't it be 6? Why can't it be 7? Why do we have to limit it to 5? And is it really 5 rather than 4?
Oh, that's an existential question. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you. So there's 2 elements to it. So one is the achievability of the objectives for us as an organisation and where we're heading. 4 tends to be where it fits in a comfortable place for us to be able to achieve and deliver those objectives based on previous experience, based on the work that needs to happen around them and based on everything else that we're doing. Those feel achievable. They feel like they're meaningful. They feel like we're committing to something effectively. The 5 that we've currently got are based on the feedback that we've had so far. So at the moment, those 5 are coming out particularly top compared to the others. So there's a conversation that we then need to have as a bit of a system to go, okay, if they're coming out considerably more than others, do we want to broaden it to 5, or are we sticking with the 4, in which case these are the 4 that we're going to have and this is where we're going to go. Any above and beyond that, it feels like we're getting into a place where we're committing to stuff which we can't necessarily fully commit to delivering as an organisation due to everything else that we've got going on.
So there's still a little bit of work then potentially to reduce the 5 to 4.
Yes.
Okay. Right. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Tom. Really, really good work. As you know, supporting you on the committee. I just had a few questions really on clarity. I think, this is one of those areas where it's always difficult to measure exactly what's been achieved. And I think that will be a challenge going forward for a lot of this work. But maybe we don't need to have exact data on what has been achieved because sometimes the messaging is enough. That's my personal view. In particular, absolutely support the work with regard to digital exclusion. I really struggle that the council still send out consultations only online. I had to help a resident just last week who was dyslexic to complete a consultation. I find it remarkable that we don't offer further opportunities to respond to consultations for every consultation that goes out. And I just wondered if you had a comment on that. The peer-to-peer, you just answered part of my question, which was, is that work just within our own locally funded schools, or does it go broader? I'm just interested to know, do you get a lot of buy-in from the academies? There's obviously, you could say that some people might not want to be open and transparent about what's going on in their school places. And I just wonder what proportion of response you get from buy-in with the academies. I understand this is sort of crosses the barrier between work of within the organisation and taking it beyond the organisation. I just want to include in that the councillors, because I have a eyesight disability. I get support, fantastic support from the council with anything that I raise. But do councillors somehow fall outside a remit somewhere within? We're not employees of the council. So I just had that query popped up in my head as to where we sit as councillors, really, in terms of equality requirements and disability requirements. Yeah, I think that's it for the moment. Thank you.
So evidence first. Evidence is a thing that we need to establish how we're going to. So my plan will be, once we've got the objectives agreed, we then come up with an action plan. We then come up with the measures about, okay, so how are we going to measure that we're achieving and we're making a difference in relation to this? For some of them, it will be considerably easier than others. So where we have a particular figure, for example, attached to it, it's much easier to be able to go, that figure is dropping. So therefore we can see the impact of what it is that we're doing. In other situations, there will be other measures that we can use to be able to go, actually, we can see the outcome of this, we can see the impact that we're having. But in some situations, I think we're going to have to, hope is too strong a word, but be reassured by the work and the impact that the work's having. So we can do some community engagement, we can do some feedback, soft feedback from the community to establish whether or not it's making a difference. But it's finding that blended approach, I think, of what can we find that's data related and what can we find that's feedback related, and how do we have both of those to be able to show the progress that we're making and the difference that we're making in relation to it. In relation to the consultation specific bit, as an organisation, we have a commitment under the public sector equality duty, but also under the reasonable adjustment bit of the equality legislation, to make sure that we are putting in steps reasonable adjustments. So it's a conversation I will go back and have with our consultation lead around where and how we are picking up alternative routes for completion of consultations, and I'll take that back as a specific action to take forward, because it should be something that we're doing. If we're providing it in a specific way, there should be an alternative route to that in some way, shape or form. In relation to the proportion of that are academies or not, I don't have the specific figure, my apologies, but I do know that it is both academies and retained schools that are responding and are completing the peer-on-peer form. I can find that figure if you're desperate for it. I'm more than happy to.
No, looking for an indication as to whether they are participating and to what level. You know, if you say that you have a number that are participating, that's sufficient for me. I just didn't want to feel that it was something we were only doing with our schools and it wasn't really being participated in, because you know, the vast majority of schools are now academies, aren't they? And that's where we probably need to have the biggest impact.
So yeah, no, it's across the board. There are some areas where we're probably not having the feedback that we'd want to, and I think if we're going to make some progress when we're going to push against it, kind of picking up Councillor Trimble's point, it gives us an opportunity to be able to say, actually, it's having worth to the process, and this is the worth it's having to the process, to see whether or not we can use that as a bit of a lever to get others to use it as well. Because I think the greater understanding we've got, the easier it is for us to establish the work that we need to do and have that evidence trail for it in some way, shape or form. In relation to councillors, there's a number of different elements. So yes, as an organisation, we have a responsibility to support around reasonable adjustments, as we would anyone else that is providing something on behalf of us or with us in some way, shape or form. So absolutely we do. Members also have a responsibility around compliance with the public sector equality duty and all of the other bits. So it's a dual-edged sword, in as much as there is a responsibility on us, but there's also a responsibility on elected members as well to be in compliance with the legislation.
Sir Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say I am feeling very woolly about this thing. I can see the beauty of it in terms of, for example, improve how the council demonstrates and actions leadership around equality in the community. I can see that. I can really see that. But I got the feeling that, for example, in the discussions you've had with us about a reduction of 15% in the number of cases of school-based peer-on-peer, I mean, clearly that is statistical. It's purely statistics. And you're relying on people, you're relying on honest, reliable people within schools, in a political organization as much as an educational, to tell you what the story is. And you've already made not excuses, but you've expressed concerns about some coming forward and some not coming forward. And I just wondered if you have actually come up with methods of going, you might call it an acting scenario, or I wrote down plays, for example. I wrote down the word plays. Did you ever have a thought that you're going to go, are you able to go into, for example, a school, an example school, to find out ways you can actually work with one or two schools? Because it's no point in working with them all. You're not going to get anywhere. You've got to find a way to work with one or two schools with a setup, a play, an example of what discrimination is. I mean, for example, so you're going in and you're having the ability possibly to bring people together to show them how difficult discrimination is, how important it is in our community that's now becoming more and more diverse, to have ways in which they recognize immediately this person's being discriminated against. People are making a joke about their name, their color, their creed. And, you know, it's quite, because people are living in their lives. I mean, I went to see a cardiologist who'd taken a job in Taunton. And he said, I'm really upset. I'm now a consultant in Taunton. And there's not a mosque in Taunton for my Muslim kids. I was astonished. And he felt discriminated against because in some respects, the hospital had not made it clear that there was no way that he could worship or take his kids to the mosque at a certain point. I think it's a Saturday, I'm not sure, but forgive me. Friday. So the point is, what I'm trying to say is I don't detect any form of practical
unit that you know you've got all this here. We're going to look at this. We're going to try and get the numbers. We're going to come back to you with the numbers. We're going to say how much is reduced or how much is increased or what the effect is. And I like all that, and I congratulate you for doing this very nebulous work, very difficult. So I really congratulate you. I like to hear what you're talking, trying to put some meat on the bone, but I don't see any meat. I see a lot of numbers. And you'll come back to me and say, well, we haven't been able to get proper numbers, and it's not sure. You know, and I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. I would prefer if you had something where you said, right, we've identified. I'm going to stop talking in a minute. But you've identified certain things within organisations that need to have an example of what happens. With children in particular, you need to have that example. There are loads of auxiliary workers who are working who've got degrees, in fact, who could actually, I can maybe find something in King Alfred's that you could actually look at, work with, and go and get a chance to have people to come, kids to come around you, please excuse me calling them kids, children coming around you, or not around you, around a specialist person who is actually enacting or doing something positive to see what can happen. Then you would see the results of what would happen in a school. I'm sorry, I'm being slightly woolly myself because I'm trying to put something, a practical application, and it's the same in every single one. You need to find, you know, you're working with council and with external partners, but you haven't found them yet. So you've got to find people who will actually put this practical application in before you can actually find you're making a difference. So find out, you know, how difficult it is. Mr. Chairman, I've run out of words. Thank you.
Oh. In which case I shall bring some more. So there's a couple of points that I'll raise. So one is there is an action plan that will support these objectives, which I think will give the meat that you're asking for. So what the objectives do is set, this is what we want to achieve. This is the outcome that we want. That will then be supported by a set of actions that we as an organisation or with partners will take. So if we take the schools-based one that you spoke about, we already have a good working knowledge of individual and organisations that we could work with. We already have a good set of external community-based organisations that we could engage with to support and provide some work. We've got some ideas around some specific actions that we can do around training sessions, around courses, around opportunities that are available for people. So there is work that sits behind that provides the meat to the bones, but until we know the direction that we're taking, we can't firm up and confirm that meat to that bone until we know the bits that we need to focus on and the bits that we're taking forward. So with all of these, there is a set of kind of draft, for want of another way of putting it, actions that we've got identified in relation to it. But those we're not going to firm up until we know the direction that we're taking and where we're going with it. So that should add more tangible, achievable outcomes based on what it is that we're doing and the direction that we've got and the actions that we're going to take in relation to that. And those could be school specific, they could be across the system, they could be working with third party organisations. So there is some meat to come in relation to that. In relation to your mosque point, just because I feel like it's a point that's worth clarifying, there is a mosque in Taunton. Is it? Yep. There's one in Taunton and one in Yeovil. At Glastonbury, my apologies, cancellation. My apologies. Yep. Yep. Yep.
I know I went to funeral once at a mosque in Bristol. So I accept what you're saying. I explained about the funeral I gone to and I assumed that but I do accept. But there's no goal in it.
Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll let the my equivalent know in the Foundation Trust, but also share the details with yourself so that you've got them should you want them at a later date.
Thank you for it. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, may I just
I suppose so, Councillor.
Thank you very much for
Sorry, your golden words are being lost to us because you haven't
I'm
got
so
your
sorry.
microphone.
I'm so sorry. I couldn't possibly hope to have my golden words lost. I'm wondering if there is such a thing as a diversity counsellor in other organisations. I mean, have you never come across like in an academy where there be someone in? There must be someone in every academy who's got the responsibility for diversity. Must be. Is that not the case?
So I would say that's not the case. There are some people, there are some very good and well-working people within academies
Sure.
and within education settings. There are some which don't, and there are some where it's sat centrally somewhere else within the midst of the academy trust. So it varies depending on the institution that you're talking about and where you're heading. But yeah, we've got connections, we've got ways of doing things.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. So we have the background and purpose of the report, page 178, which has led us to be able to discuss the top 5, possibly soon to be top 4 recommendation objectives. We've also got the equality impact assessment guidance on page 183 and the draft strategy on page 191 and the equality impact assessment forms 197, page 197. Do members have any comment on these at this stage, please? No? Mr. Rutland.
I will take Councillor Seeb's comment around the tracking as part of the comment in relation to the table. Thank you.
Councillor Lation.
Chair, I just wanted to say the 5th bullet point about improving how the council demonstrates an actions leader. I see that as kind of overarching, and I wonder whether that could go higher up the list of objectives, because I think that is really important for us as members to have that prominent and our understanding of how important that is.
Well, in many respects, as you say, that might be something that sits above the 4 objectives. So rather than it being a 5th objective, it is the overriding principle. Okay. Right. Well, with that comment, ladies and gentlemen, is there anything else that we want to add to the recommendations before us this morning? No? So are we happy, therefore, to thank Mr. Rutland for his report, to have noted the work that is being done, and to endorse what is being achieved on our behalf? Yes, everybody happy with that? Right. Can I thank you very much, Mr. Rutland, for being with us this morning? That was extremely interesting, and we look forward to further presentations in the coming months. Thank you very much. So that then leads us to agenda item 9, which is the scrutiny review update, and I will invite Officer Wooldridge, please, to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair. And again, hopefully members will see from the agenda pack from page 201, you'll see certainly there in terms of an overview of the progress that's being made following the council's approval to the scrutiny review back in September 25. And again, just to highlight, that was only 4 months ago. So in practical terms, though we have been making the planned improvements, we've certainly made significant progress in terms of consistency of practice across the 5 committees. We've also undertaken 3 training workshops, which weren't just confined to the 65 scrutiny councillors. It was actually opened up to all councillors to gain a benefit in terms of what the scrutiny function involves and some of the improvements that we're clearly wanting to drive forward as part of our own plan. You'll see in the attached presentation, and again hoping that everybody's already got those in the papers without me having to share it on the screen, but I'm happy to share if people would find that useful. But again, if you went to page 204 of the agenda pack, again, you'd see there the background. Many of you will remember the 11 recommendations that were agreed. You'll then see those recommendations set out clearly on pages 205 through to 208. And then slide 209 starts particularly in terms of summarising the progress that we've made collectively, both in terms of councillors, but also in terms of officers supporting the scrutiny function since that review was agreed. And many of you hopefully will recognise particularly some of those examples, not least of which a standardised outcome tracker. You'll know that that's on every single committee's agenda, equally in terms of the work that we're doing again in terms of the forward work programme. You will see, and for those that were at Climate in Place last week, you will note that there is a new style of annual report, again, taking some of the learning from the review and applying it in practice. So Scrutiny Climate in Place is the pilot annual report, which will be going forward to the full council meeting on the 4th of March. And again, we'll be welcoming some feedback from councillors around the style of that. And again, we can refine that as we go through, in particular, of 2026. If I then move us on to slide that's set out on page 210, again, you'll see there in terms of where we're focusing activity over the next 3 months. Again, particularly in terms of further communications, I think it's really important, particularly when we talk about key stakeholders. I think we'd all probably agree that one of the main key stakeholder are the residents and businesses of Somerset. So again, I think one of the challenges and opportunities that the review identified was how scrutiny can further improve being the voice of Somerset's communities, and how those areas of concern or areas for improvement are facilitated through the work of the scrutiny. So again, I think there's something there particularly around how do we therefore make people more aware of the work of the scrutiny committee and how the scrutiny committee can help support some of those areas that people may want to see this council improve on. So again, there's something there around how do we therefore moat the opportunity that scrutiny provides. I think there's then clearly something particularly around measuring what we see as we've talked very much about achieving good scrutiny. Clearly that could be judgmental in some ways. One person's good scrutiny may not be another person's good scrutiny. So again, there are a series of measures and indicators to help us as part of that review. Because again, whilst we're only 4 months in, the review of the improvements is scheduled to take place in January next year. So again, we just need to be very clear about how we're measuring our success at the scrutiny review. You'll hopefully also recognise, particularly in terms of how executive directors are supporting the work of each scrutiny committee, just like the executive directors support the executive and the other committees of this council. And again, you'll know that certainly many of you know Alan in terms of his role both as monitoring officer but also the executive director of resources, strategy and transformation. Again, that's important because Alan's our executive director champion for this committee. You'd have had the benefit earlier of knowing that Chris Hall was online and joining us for the HRA item, albeit that Chris principally supports scrutiny communities and scrutiny climate in place. Mel, who's also joined us earlier, Mel Locke, supporting adults and health. And obviously, we also have the benefit in terms of both Claire Winter for children and families. And today we've also had the benefit of our Chief Finance Officer also being present supporting this committee. So again, it's important because it shows those practical instances and examples of how executive directors are also providing advice and support to this committee, and helps provide that very real balance to the support that's provided to the executive. So again, some of this is about showing some of the tangible elements. I think the thing I'd probably just focus on finally are some of the areas that we've headed up under page 211, which are challenges and concerns. And I think it's probably fair, and it's been referenced a few times by councillors today. I think it's important just to recognise how busy the council is in terms of its activities, its focus in trying to achieve improvements, trying to achieve that financial sustainability, trying to deliver the transformation, trying to continue to deliver the services that all of our communities really value. So clearly, at a time of being very busy, we're having to prioritise our capacity in terms of the support and work that we do. So I think it's important just to recognise, therefore, introducing and taking forward a scrutiny view at any time requires competing for people's time and support. I think if you overlay that with what is a very busy council, it's just something to be very aware of in terms of the progress of the scrutiny review. Scrutiny will always be, just like the other functions of the council, competing with other priorities that are prevalent at that point in time. So I'd rather be very upfront than that than rather assume that we all just know that. I think there's also something there that's linked to that, particularly in terms of the support that individual committees may receive on occasion. I wouldn't say throughout, but on occasion, those could become some pinch points, you know, where we have external inspections that can create additional draw on some of the officer capacity that your committees have. And again, that could affect the implementation of the scrutiny review at a particular point. So it's just, again, just being alive to these are some things which can or could affect the scrutiny review achievements over the next 12 months. Fundamentally, though, obviously, the fact that we have clearly set out the stall in terms of these are the areas we want to improve. I think we've already seen some really good positive progress in terms of the way of working, some of the ways in which scrutiny have made a number of recommendations. Many of you will know that certainly I think this is probably the first year since Somerset Council has been created that there has been a collective report from the scrutiny committees that's going forward as part of the budget papers to this Wednesday's executive meeting that sets out a series of recommendations from each of the 5 scrutiny committees. And again, in terms of a change, that's a change to what we've been able to achieve in previous years. So I think hopefully members will recognise that we are already seeing not just the sort of green shoots of progress, but we're actually seeing some tangible examples of the way in which scrutiny is contributing constructively to the work of the council.
Thank you very much, Scott. So members, any comments on progress to date and of the slides that Officer Waldridge has just presented? Obviously, we're just coming up to the formation of the new committees. Whilst I know it's noted on page 210, manage the transition to the new Climate, Environment and Place Committee, but in fact there will be 4 new committees. They've all got slightly new roles, even if they're substantially the same. So we, for instance, in this particular committee will become corporate and strategic. And I'm sure the new challenges of that title will be significant. So it will be a new set of committees that we will be dealing with. And I suspect that May will be the moment at which the reality of some of these things will really begin to bite. And we will hopefully take advantage of the opportunities that the new systems will give us, particularly in terms of more task and finish work. Yes, Councillor Johnson.
Hi, thanks, Scott. One of the things you mentioned was about trying to encourage more community resident participation in scrutiny functions and scrutiny meetings. It's been a recent hot topic for a lot of my residents, with upcoming planning meetings that they would love to have attended, that working people cannot make meetings that happen during the day. And from the time when I was working on scrutiny at a district council and the meetings were in the evening, you could draw in more people sometimes, not always. Not everyone wants to participate in the scrutiny function. But it would be remiss of me not to mention it, because the fact that all our meetings are held in the daytime is not inclusive, and it will not permit many people to participate in our meetings. And I just wondered if that is covered in any way, shape or form anywhere within our future explorations of scrutiny, particularly with the relevance for today, but also other meetings of the council.
And again, we certainly, as part of the work that's done in terms of how the council convenes its meetings, where and what time, hopefully many councillors will be more than aware that we undertake an annual review as part of that process. And more recently, we've just taken what are the forthcoming 2026 and early 27 dates through the full council meeting in December. I think the point that Councillor Johnson makes is a really good point, which is to continue to review, is there potentially a barrier for some members, Somerset's communities, based upon the location and the timing of its meetings, and whether that barrier could be improved by some alternative approaches. I think that's one element. I think another element is perhaps also recognising, and it came through the scrutiny review quite strongly, which was that actually the vast majority of a scrutiny of a particular activity or service isn't necessarily best done through a committee meeting, and actually a number of other means of scrutiny which could involve, and it is open to the scrutiny committees to consider, more flexible means of engagement with the public. I mean, there is nothing effectively preventing a scrutiny committee from convening a public workshop at a different time, which they may feel is more convenient, in a different location, in order to ensure better stakeholder involvement. I think the initial bit, and it's part of the scrutiny review as well, recognising, which is, how do members of the public know what the scrutiny committees are intending to look at over the next 12 months, or even how many members of the public actually know there is anything called a scrutiny committee and how it could help them in some of the things that they feel are important in their community. So it comes back to this piece about the communications plan and stakeholder. And I think there's something then about how we look at promoting, particularly the forward plans of the committees, because I think there's something about how we look at, with the work of the committees, what communities may well be telling each of you in your councillor roles, and the work programmes of the committees. So is there an alignment, because logically we would hope there is, between the hot topics that Somerset communities are talking to you about and what the scrutiny committees have planned to look at over the next 12 months? Because if there isn't an alignment, then perhaps that's something we need to be thinking about as part of the forward work programmes, because it's more likely that those hot topics will encourage people to leave their homes or even join online and participate in scrutiny committee. If they don't see that alignment, logically, most people don't engage or get involved. So I think there's something here about that communication plan, but also the work of the forward work programmes. And again, certainly from an officer perspective, something we would welcome councillors' views on is particularly those communication plans and those forward work programmes. And if we think there's more that we could do, then I think that's certainly the opportunity that lies there in 2026.
Right, thank you very much, Scott. Councillor Filmer.
Thanks, Chairman. I guess my view at the moment is very much sort of the proof of the pudding is going to be in the eating of this, and see how it moves forward, because I'm particularly as to how we monitor, measure, and how we then report back what's happening, because it's easy to quantify the fewer meetings and the fewer, but we need to make sure the fewer meetings and fewer committees don't end up in less scrutiny, and that's where I guess that's where I want to make sure we're keen on. Also, I think it was on page, what is it, 207, where there are a couple of things we wanted to get clarified. Was we refer to systematic scrutiny tools, which I'd love to understand a bit more as to what that is. We also refer to the work program needs to have clear justification for inclusion. That always comes to me as to who decides what that justification is and how do we influence that. And equally, the following line, which talked about where scrutiny cannot clearly add value, it shouldn't come to us. Well, who makes the decision as to where scrutiny can or can't add value? So that's where, as I say, at the moment, my feeling is happy with where we're moving, but I think all of us have a duty to keep a very close eye on how this is going, and I need to understand how we have that ability to keep an eye on it, because again, it was mentioned by Scott. I mean, resources we understand are going to be under pressure, so I would agree there are times when other methods other than the committee are the right way to move forward, but do we have the resources to actually make those happen? Because I have been aware in the past of us talking about having task and finish groups which haven't always necessarily materialized in the way we expected them to. So again, proof of the pudding will come down the line.
I mean, the reference to task and finish groups is a really good one, because again, there are only so many task and finish groups we can support at any one time. And I think again, we'll come back to prioritising what are the key areas we want to actually think that a task and finish will add value to. There is also, and again, at last week's Scrutiny Climate in Place, I'm sure Councillor Holbase will remind me if I get this wrong, but we've also recognised, and I can see Councillor Mansell's also got his hand up, and it may even be on this example I'm about to reference. Scrutiny Climate in Place have also recognised the value of putting in place what's called a spotlight review. So also recognising an opportunity for an informal workshop where members can look at a topic literally by, as the name suggests, shining a spotlight on it, getting a position statement in terms of how it's operating, and almost that spotlight review provides hopefully the scrutiny members with reassurance, or conversely, the spotlight review could also lead to some of those scrutiny members feeling that actually there's more that needs to be looked at here, and perhaps this warrants a task and finish group. So it comes back to, using the suite of tools, and apologies for using what may sound a very practical sort of example in one way, but one of the other things we're working on is what's called a scrutiny toolkit, which I think better articulates the range in ways which the scrutiny function could be delivered that aren't solely around committee meetings, that there's more diversity in terms of how councillors can take forward and work collectively on matters. But I think there's also something in that toolkit about how we also hold partners to account, and particularly some of the partnership scrutiny, and how that can be best achieved as well. Certainly experience from other authorities does show, and general best experience shows, that particularly external organisations and main public sector bodies like the NHS and the police, there is particular value in things like the spotlight reviews and working with them than solely putting them onto an agenda and inviting them to attend a meeting and respond in terms of how they're doing. So I think there's something again about the ways of working and adapting that will lend. I think the other thing I think for me is again just highlighting, particularly in terms of the work that, and it's referenced on that same slide, that all of the scrutiny chairs and vice chairs come together on a monthly basis. The value of that is sharing good practice, but also looking at their forward work programs and trying to look at again, what the key priorities are and making sure we haven't got duplication. Now, that may sound a quite simple sort of process, but actually it's very valuable in terms of sharing that sort of intelligence, that focus, understanding the types of thematic areas. But that also involves, and it's not on the slide, but that also involves the chair and vice chair of the audit committee as well. And it also gives an insight into some of the assurance and audit work that the council's doing to improve the complementary work that scrutiny and audit do. So why am I saying all these points? I think for me, it's just showing that if I was to wind the clock back probably 18 months, a lot of the things I've talked about weren't necessarily happening in a structured way. And part of the review is about actually putting it in place because that adds value. The thing about the work programme is the value of that work, as in the proof in the pudding, is that the forward work programmes of every single scrutiny committee are published with the agendas and papers. So the committee collectively, as can any one of the 110 councillors, can ask questions about that very work programme which the chairs and vice chairs have directed and led on, and in some ways positively, constructively challenge that, or even make suggestions for alternatives. So I think the proof in the pudding bit is that work then leads to that public show and tell in terms of this is the plan, work and activities. If others feel there are different priorities or feel that particular residents' issues or communities' issues aren't being reflected, it enables that debate at every single one of the committees. So I think for me, it's, we are seeing the progress and we are seeing particular that sort of structure which is adding value, and particularly the complementary work that's going on with audit committee as well. But I don't know if Chair you wanted to, because I know clearly you're a member of that chair and vice chairs.
I think that's summarised it very well. Thank you, Scott. I've got Dave Mansell online. Councillor Mansell.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I couldn't be with you this morning. Yes, I've got. I think it's three questions. But I will start by saying that I very much welcome the changes that have come from this review. I think they're a good set of changes now being implemented, and we are starting to see some improvements already. So that is encouraging. My first question is around one of the early recommendations about developing the shared vision for scrutiny and how widely that is shared, and sort of how that is being done. Part of it is through the protocol, but I'm wondering whether what more is being done to ensure all parts of the council have this shared vision for scrutiny. Now, this may be connected to my second question, which is in relation to could we be told a little bit more about the training being provided for officers, and also it'd be interesting to hear about the coaching for chairs, the training for members in general, and scrutiny members has been mentioned, so we've seen that. Could we be told a little about what further training is being provided, and maybe with that shared vision partly in mind, and connected to that? So I'm sort of extending the questions, but the involvement of scrutiny at an early stage in the policy process, that's something that I have to say I often feel frustrated about. I do feel that scrutiny could add something at the beginning of some new policy areas or new ways of doing things, and yet we often end up being presented with a very fully formed set of proposals that have come through the process, and scrutiny is just being asked to rubber stamp it later on, rather than contributing at an early stage, which I think the vision would expect, especially on occasions. And then finally, with regard to the next 3 months, it's mentioned that the transition to the new Climate, Environment and Place Committee will need some managing, and that is a very big change for the two committees that are being largely merged into one. Could we be told what is envisaged, what is planned for that transition over the next 3 months? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mansell. I will ask Officer Baldridge to comment on those points, please.
So I think starting with the first point, particularly around the vision and understanding, I think much of that will be grounded in terms of that communications plan. I think the review in itself, particularly in terms of its key tangible changes, needs to be better articulated in plain English, particularly to members of the public about the value that Scrutiny offers, but then to the staff of our organisation. Again, so I think there's a dual, I'm not saying it's the same message for both, but I think we need to focus, particularly in terms of that communications message and plan, on what that vision is to take people with us. So one of the priorities we've got for the next 3 months is particularly about that messaging to public and to staff. And again, our intention was for that messaging certainly to be under the oversight of the chairs and vice chairs as that sort of gateway, but equally, if members feel that you'd like us to broaden the circulation of that proposed messaging so that you can contribute ideas and views, then as always, I'm always happy to hear back, particularly where people feel that we can improve the message, but also the engagement of the public. And so that's part of our work activities over the next 3 months. I think the second bit, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I think some of the examples, particularly around some of the challenges that Scrutiny been experiencing, feeling like it's on the tail end of a conga, particularly in terms of decision reports that are going to executive. I think some of that will come back an awful lot to improvements in forward planning across the board. So I've talked a lot about improvements to the Scrutiny forward work programmes, but that's been matched as well by improvements to the executive forward work programmes, because again, the two need to be working in parallel so that you can get that much earlier involvement. I think the other part is the work that we do on the forward work programmes in terms of the forward horizon scanning. And again, that's part of the discussions that are being held with the chairs and vice chairs of each committee with their relevant executive director. In simple terms, those discussions need to focus on particularly the chair and vice chairs being able to articulate what they see as the priorities that the members want to see, which should have a link as well to what communities also want to see in terms of key topics. But that also need to be complemented by the executive directors, particularly as part of that sort of show and tell discussion, being clear about any service changes, any major procurement or commissioning activities, any significant potential changes in funding arrangements for councils. And that conversation, I think, better arms the scrutiny committees to be able to identify, examples, say, where a significant service contract could be up for renewal in, say, 18 months, 2 years' time. And I could pick an example such as, say, the highway service contract. Well, clearly, members will probably be very interested in terms of the highways contract, and the fact that it may be a given sort of year or 2 years away, scrutiny with that knowledge may wish to actually want to be earlier involved in looking at the specification for that document, looking at the procurement arrangements, rather than waiting for it to appear on an executive forward plan, by which time it's already undertaken its procurement, it's already well advanced in terms of its decision pathway. So I think for me, it's how those conversations and how that more greater structure around forward work programme can help foresee, and I think help distill, what are the key areas where Scrutiny feels it can add value. I think the review was quite clear in identifying the sheer breadth of activity and scope of our services means that in any given year, there is no way all of the scrutiny committees can look at everything. That is impossible. You will always have to prioritise your activity. So for me, it's how that work in particular with the chairs and vice chairs and the executive directors help facilitate, are you looking at the critical topics in that year, and are you looking at them early enough? Because I know many members have clearly fed back, and quite rightly, that you felt quite late to some items, and I think it's how we can improve that forward work planning and how that insight from executive directors can help give that. I think the third point, particularly in terms of some of the training, I mean, I know that in addition to the scrutiny training, certainly in terms of chairs and vice chairs, there is some chairs and vice chairs training that we are running in March, again, as part of a programme of improving support for chairs and vice chairs, because again, that's not an easy role to do, particularly in times of a very busy council. So there is that. In terms of the training for officers, again, in addition to the wider corporate induction and how governance features as part of staff training for new starters, there is also a suite of training that's on the Learning Centre in terms of online training for officers about governance, and within governance, decision making and scrutiny, and to find out more. And there's a whole suite of training content and guidance that we provide for all officers on our intranet, which again, people can access 265 days a year, 24 hours a day if they like, because it's not restricted to traditional training methodology of in-person style training. So there's a variety of training already there. I think for me, one of the things that we're doing certainly at the moment, which is reviewing the scope of our training programme, particularly for, and it comes back to my forward planning point, particularly for what's known as the 27 and 28 year. Many councils will be aware that clearly we have an election planned in May 27, so we are already starting that review of member training and induction, but in link to that, officer training as well. I think we have had challenges that have existed before vesting day, but have continued since vesting day. So even when we had 5 councils, I think the challenges that we've got better at making improvements on is the fact that we have a member training programme and we have an officer training programme. And whilst they are similar, they are not necessarily fully connected. So we are doing more work with our human resources colleagues to look at how there is more of a one training programme, whether you're a member or an officer. And I do know that more recently, some of the councillors who have been elected as part of recent by-elections, we have made some inroads, and apologies that this wasn't offered back in 2022, but we have made some inroads in that those new councillors in the past 12 months have been invited or are in the process of attending the same induction programmes that new starters have, so that officers and staff are actually coming together on exactly the same training programme. And I'd say, as an example, that shows us where we need to be going more of, rather than having completely separate training programmes.
Okay, thank you. Right, Dave?
Yeah, nearly. One point was missed, but
Yes, the transition.
perhaps if I could just mention that was encouraging. Could I make a sort of suggestion related to that? About communications on scrutiny was mentioned and training. Could I suggest that there is communication which goes widely to all staff, so it's not sort of tucked away, you have to go and find it, that there is within the communications plan which has been mentioned, that does include something that all officers should potentially see, so it sparks a thought that there's something for them to consider there. Just mention the chairs and vice chairs training planned for March. My understanding is that scrutiny membership and chairs will be confirmed in May. I'm just wondering what happens if we end up with any changes in chairs and vice chairs following May. It doesn't have to be answered now, but there may need to just be noted that could occur. And yes, I asked about the climate. The new committee, Climate, Environment and Place Committee, the transition plans for that over the next few months.
I mean, certainly in terms on that first point, just a reminder that that's chairs and vice chairs training. What we're clearly anticipating is that needs to be part of an annual cycle. So where we do get changes, they may have missed the training that would have taken place in March, but they will then be on the cohort of training for what will be the 2026 chairs and vice chairs. So we will sweep up any changes in the next training event. I think the other bit on the transition, I know we've certainly been progressing work around that transition, particularly in terms of we've organised at least 2 meetings now since Christmas to work through that transition. What does that involve? Clearly, we've already got the constitutional changes all in place. They were all completed in September and December last year. So by the time we get to the annual general meeting in May, we will move from 5 to 4, and the functions of each of those 4 committees are now agreed and fully defined. I think the bit that quite rightly members of Climate and Place and Communities are looking for further clarity on is again just that assurance about, well, May's only 3 months, well, it's now 2 months away. And clearly in terms of the practicalities of 2 current committees' work programmes and how they are going to be reflected in the new single committee for those areas. And then also the work that's being progressed in terms of the membership. I think the only thing I would flag from an appointments perspective, there are currently 65 committee places across 5 committees. From May, there will be 52 committee places across 4 committees. I know there's been a lot of focus, particularly in terms of 2 committees becoming 1, but effectively the appointments process of an annual general meeting is that council will then be looking at, with the nominations of the political group leaders, for who are the 52 councillors for the 4 committees. Why am I making this point? I think there is potentially a risk that some members may be feeling that there are just 2 committees being directly affected by the scrutiny review, and therefore the 26 councillors just need to think about what's going to happen to them. Actually, I think the question is more that there are 65 councillors going into 52, and it's how we prioritise. Thank you. How we prioritise through the council's appointments process and the nominations of the political group leaders, and that's the key bit in terms of how we ensure that our group of 52 councillors are the best possible group of 52 councillors to support the scrutiny review and the improvements in scrutiny. So at the moment, what I would say is we've certainly got the work underway in terms of the work programme and how do we get an extensive work programme into a manageable work programme for the new committee. The discussions are clearly in hand with the executive director, because the executive director for communities is the same executive director for climate and place, who is the same executive director for the new committee. So we do have some consistency there from an executive director support perspective. I think the element, particularly as part of the transition, is in some ways it's no different to the point that I've made about the election in May 27, in that whilst yes, we will go from 5 committees down to 4, therefore we will go from 10 chairs and vice chairs to 8 chairs and vice chairs. Just like with an election, each of the chairs and vice chairs are empowered in their roles right the way up until that annual general meeting. So we would want to, clearly as officers, take the benefit of all of those 10 chairs and vice chairs right the way up until May in informing the transition from 5 committees to 4. So whilst I appreciate, and I know it's been articulated, that but we won't necessarily know who the chair and vice chair of this new committee is until May, that doesn't prevent the transition work being done with the existing chairs and vice chairs over the next 2 months, and us clearly garnering the experience that they have to support the transition. So that the point I'm trying to make in terms of the transition is I wouldn't want the AGM to be seen as an artificial hurdle in the transition. We are working on the transition as we still speak, and we will continue to work on it right the way through to the AGM, so that we are well prepared as an authority for all 4 committees to hit the ground running in their new state from that AGM meeting onwards, and that no one committee is disadvantaged.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dave, for the question. Councillor Seeb, you wanted to ask something?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It's just a couple of points that came up in the around the training issues. I'm sorry, that's not pointing towards me. I'm conscious that we quite often talk about officers receiving training on the new acquisition systems, the procurement rules. I'm not so clear that I've heard about what help officers get with training on strategic decision making, things such as calculating, looking at a situation going forwards, and the proactivity, the making choices in woolly logic circumstances. Going back some, but bless her, the Margaret Thatcher's Cabinet Office used to be quite strong on this across government, and introduced things like expected value calculations where you've got different decision options. The influence diagram where it was just a big mishmash of policy, and you push it in one place and it pops out in another. You know, these are all very useful tools for managers and senior managers. I'd be interested in knowing whether what strategic decision-making support is given. And similarly, we don't tend to talk about setting the contracts up and getting a great contract. What we don't seem to discuss is contract management and the contract management rules, the day-to-day operating of an existing contract within Treasury rules, which is, I suppose, to a degree covered after the facts by audit, but we ought to probably give some thought to the training, making sure that people are aware of the rules around contract management. So it just struck me as you said that I hadn't heard a couple of topics. I'm not sure that leads to a direct change to the thing, but I think in terms of the officers,
Indeed. I mean, I think almost what you're suggesting, Councillor C, was an area for us to look at as a scrutiny committee in terms of training more widely for officers. So it's not necessarily something we need to talk about this morning, but perhaps put on the agenda to look at in the future.
Exactly. I'm really planting a seed of thought into Officer Woolridge's mind, because I think he was nodding as though he is light bulbs were going on. So I don't even think it changes our recommendations.
No, I didn't.
But I thought it was worth bringing those up. And the other thing which didn't get mentioned specifically was framework contracts, which of course are contracts to contracts, enabling contracts. And I think we ought to be popping those into Officer Woolridge's minds as things that need to be thought about by scrutiny.
We'll consider those lodged. Chairman. Thank you. No, we'll consider those lodged. Thank you. Just returning to the paper today, there are a couple of points I just wanted to make. One is that, just so that members are aware, it has been the habit, I understand, for the chairs and vice chairs of the various scrutiny committees to meet on a regular but somewhat ad hoc basis. This has now been formalised to once a month. So we now meet on the second Monday, the second Monday in each month. And we are now joined by the chairman of the audit committee as well, chairman and vice chairman of audit, which makes that a very useful discussion forum. It isn't decision making, but it nevertheless does allow for shared information across the committees, which I think does help the way in which scrutiny operates in the authority. The other is, and picking up Councillor Filmer's point, that really whether or not the new system works will be tested by the outcomes that we have. There is one thing, of course, we were setting up a task and finish group to look at council tax reduction. And that should have formed up in February. Now, obviously, with the huge amount of work that's going on with the budget, we can understand why that might have slipped a bit. But I think we do need to put on record at this meeting our earnest hope that that will now be formed up as quickly as possible once the budget is cleared. So if we can all please lodge that in our minds, it's an important bit of work. It's going to be a very important task and finish group. We do need it to start. Quite understand why it might not have been feasible to make it start in February, allowed to start in February, but it will need to start work fairly soon if it's going to do its job properly. So if we can record that. Is there anything else then, ladies and gentlemen, that we need to state in relation to this item? No? Thank you. We'll note that report. Thank you very much, Scott, for having presented it so comprehensively. And we'll move on to the final item, agenda item 10, which is the forward plan. Is there anything that anybody wishes to say on that? Scott, do you want to say anything about it particularly?
Other than, again, just refer members to the plan as published.
Has it got this seal on it?
Or it's got seal on it?
The seal and S106 request. Sorry, I'm just trying to get back to find it.
In spring.
Sorry, I can't seem to open it.
No, it doesn't.
I don't know why it's not coming up.
Because I think it's probably coming up in May, and this goes up to April.
Okay.
Right, Councillor Filmer.
It may be a similar answer. I noticed on the agenda for the March meeting, we've got quarter 3 reports, which were the ones we took today. Quarter 4, I presume, is that coming up then after the new formation of the new committee? And the only other thing I was going to ask was a more general thing, and I dropped a note to Scott over the weekend anyway, but it was just with papers and stuff that come out to all of us for all committees. We obviously need to have the most up-to-date information. We are quite frequently getting updated reports, but there's nothing in those updated reports that gives you the idiot's guide to what's changed from the one that you read yesterday when you were trying to do your prep for the meeting. So if there's something we can look at on that across committees, I think it would be helpful for members.
No, again, I think that's a really good point, something we do We do stress to report authors because there's a very simple feature in most of the software that they use, which allows you to identify track changes, which will really help identify very quickly exactly what's changed. So again, on that particular proposal, we are in active conversations with the service for them to do just that, and for us to replace the version that's been published to clearly show the track changes. So that's what I'm hoping that happens, certainly the next day or so. But as a method of working, that should just be how we identify where there are changes done to documents.
And the other point that Councillor Filmer was making is that in the March
we won't need
meeting,
the,
we won't need the quarter 3.
not the HRA or the finance. You will though for the performance and risk, because you've not had performance.
So performance and risk instead.
And I believe, without looking at my calendar, generally Q4 is wrapped up as part of what's called the outturn reports. Generally, the outturn reports from memory are reported to executive in June. So they will be then added to your forward work programme probably for early June.
If I could, just two things. One on the track changes was just to make sure if we can double check that that works as part of ModGov, because obviously that's where a lot of us are being encouraged, because we can actually edit that with pens and make notes. And the other thing is, when we have the meeting in March, will we get the forward plan going forward beyond April for then? Okay.
Anything else on the forward plan, gentlemen? Councillor Hopkins.
Yet again, we've had the budget report, in my opinion, a month late, because it finished in December and it should have been here in January and wasn't. And on the forward plan, we need to please ensure that budget reports, the last one was even later. It was September and it came in December, and it needs to be set up so that they are here when they are relevant, in my opinion. So I think it should be 30 days from the end of the reporting period.
Councillor, I thought you might want to comment.
Yeah, just to say that Clive Heafy makes the point that reports should be ready earlier. It does depend on how Microsoft Dynamics is set up, because it goes through Power BI reporting in order to get to those reports. I completely agree with you that 30 days would be ideal. We're not there yet, but I know that that is the aspiration of our current 151 officer, to get us to reporting, and particularly to outturn much sooner. So actually to get into a better place by the end of Q3. And I think what you've seen today is executive directors getting their position much clearer at Q3, ready for Q4. But there will always be some changes, as there have been in January this year, when we've seen this atrocious weather and the impact that's had on the roads. So there will always be changes, but I can assure the committee that that is the intention, to have reporting much earlier.
Okay, is there anything else, ladies and gentlemen? If not, can I remind you that we have a transformation workshop at 2:30, hybrid, I think, so you can join online.
What room?
Wyndham.
In the Wyndham?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay.
So for those here in person, it will be next door in the Wyndham room, but you can join online, I believe. So I will look forward to seeing some of you in one guise or another at that. Otherwise, thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.